Today I'm going to be looking at the subject of fog and mist and how to paint fog with watercolour. One of the things you need to know about fog is it dramatically increases the effects of atmosphere. Hi, my name is Joe Cartwright. Welcome to my studio. My aim with these videos is to help you paint better watercolours. And remember, if you like what you see, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll be informed of each new video I produce. In a landscape with a bright blue sky, you find that objects, as they move into the distance, they get softer, they get lighter, they get duller, and they get bluer. But when you have fog or mist around, that effect is increased in that distant objects become duller, lighter, softer, and greyer. With a bright blue sky, objects in the distance start leaning more and more towards the blue. But because you've got a grey sky when you have fog or mist, objects in the distance lean more towards the grey rather than the blue. So here we have a scene, it's a lake not far from where I live, and you've got the mist, and you can see how the objects in the distance have become quite indistinct and quite soft and lighter and duller. And then as you get closer to the foreground, then the objects start taking on more and more of their true colours. So this is what we're going to paint. The location is a place called Yarramundi. As I said, it's probably about 30 minutes drive from where I live, and it's a lovely spot. Early morning mist can create some wonderful effects, and the reflections can be quite magical as well. So I'll just do the preliminary drawing. Because it's very early in the morning, there's not a lot of detail that you can see with this subject because there's very little light. So most of these trees and the ground are going to be in silhouette with just hints of some colour. So that'll do us for this drawing. We'll now move on to the actual painting stage. My first step is to thoroughly wet the back of my paper. Now I'm using 185 GSM Arches watercolour paper. It's the texture is medium or cold press, and I begin by wetting the back thoroughly twice. With a very sort of sloshy wash of water, and then I'll just get rid of any water around the edges just to minimise the amount of water that sneaks to the front. There we go. And then I'll leave that there while I mix my colours. So we've got a very pale grey sky, slightly darker grey for the water. So for the sky, I'm going to use some cobalt blue. Very, very weak, with a little bit of burnt sienna. Burnt sienna is a complement of cobalt blue in that it's more of an orangey brown, so it will tend to grey off the blue. I'm adding a very tiny amount of permanent rose because I've managed to pick up some impurity that's given my sky colour a slightly greenish tinge, and I don't want any green in the sky. For the water, I'm going to have the same colours just a bit stronger in tone. The water is going to be reflecting the sky colour, but it's also modified a little bit by the colour of the water itself, which in this case is slightly brownish water. Maybe just a bit stronger for this. Because this is early in the morning, there's just a very small hint of warmth coming from the left-hand side of this scene. I'm going to throw in a bit of cad, very, very weak cad orange. If you don't have the Winsor Newton cad orange, use something like raw sienna. The Winsor Newton cad orange is a very yellowish orange, whereas a lot of other oranges are much more red. I'll wet this again. I'm using 185 GSM weight paper. If you use the heavier 300 GSM weight paper, you'll have to wet your paper almost twice as much to achieve the same result as what I'm achieving. That's okay, and I'll just lift it and I'll wet the board. I'm using gator board here, which is just a foam core sandwiched between two thin veneers of wood or wood fibre. It's not totally waterproof in that it does absorb some of the moisture in a way that helps keep my painting wet longer. If you don't have any gator board, then any flat waterproof material like acrylic should also be able to do the job well. My paper is now sitting nice and flat on my backing board. So I'm going to start by getting some of that weak cad orange. I'll make it a bit weaker still. I'll angle this wash so there's more cad orange on the left-hand side of my painting. Then I'll go into this cad orange wash with the weak grey sky colour. There we go. Now while that's wet, I'm going to put in these distant shapes. I'll just grab a small brush for these distant trees, as there's not a lot of size to them. I'm going to start with a cool grey colour, with here and there maybe a hint of green. I'll begin with some French ultramarine, and I'll add some raw umber to it. These are soft edges. And there's some brighter greens here. Not too bright, but alright, so we've got our distance done. I've added a little bit of extra green here. There's some slightly sharper edged trees in this area which I'll put in now, and then I'll dry this. Basically just want to hint at these shapes without a lot of detail. I'll add just a hint of dark brown at the water's edge to represent the mud in that position. This dark brown is just a mixture of French ultramarine and some burnt sienna. I'm now going to dry this, and then we'll move on to the next section. So now we're going to paint the distant trees and then move forward in our picture plane. So the trees in this section here are still quite dull. The top of the tree is a little bit lighter than the lower part, so I'm just drizzling some water to create that effect. And then this next one is going to be a bit darker still. You know, this is probably just a little bit too dark. How about just lift some of that? Let me just dry this. Because I've been drying this a number of times now, the paper has started to dry, so I'm going to just wet the board and wet a little bit of the paper. And that should settle it back down again. There we go. Okay, so now we'll paint this tree. The colour is going to have just a hint more of green in it, so I'm going to add some turquoise, cobalt turquoise, and just a hint of aureolin. Again, I don't want it quite so strong, so I'll add some water to it. That'll do. And I've taken out about 3/4 of the moisture. There you go. And these bushes go all the way across. I'll make the tone a little bit stronger to make the trees come forward by adding some cobalt turquoise and aureolin. Now a lot of this is going to be painted over when I paint the foreground. And I'll just drop in some darker colours just to vary these shapes in the distance. And then there's a bit more mist here, so I'm going to lift some of that. Great. Okay, that will do. Now we'll work on this area here. I've got some trees. Because they're quite dark, I don't have to worry about lifting any of the paint underneath. But I've got some lighter bushes here, so what I might do, I'll just lift some of that colour. There we go. Just so when I paint these lighter bushes, they come out lighter than they would have had I painted the light colour over the dark background. Alright, now I'm going to work on these foreground trees and the ground here. Some reasonably bright grass there. It's not going to be super bright because there's not a lot of light. The wet soil creates some dark passages along the shoreline. Just want a small highlight here. Appears to be a tree stump. All right. I've got some dark paint underneath from this tree. It's left a sharp edge there. I'm just sort of scrubbing that out. Adding some shadow. Now we'll paint these tall trees. So when I'm painting these trees, they're called she oaks, an Australian tree, and I look at the curve of the foliage. I don't try to look at individual leaves or needles in this case. They have sort of very thin needle-like leaves. And I just try to replicate that, the feeling of the tree and how the main branches are shaped. So into all this dark leftover mass, I'm going to add some French ultramarine, a little bit of cobalt turquoise, some aureolin. They're not a bright green, they're more like a dull green. I'll dull the green some more with some burnt sienna. And that's good. Okay. And I just move the brush in the direction of the outer edge of the foliage. I'm just painting in all the trunks without any of the branches just yet, just to help me paint in the foliage. I have to paint the foliage in before the trunks dry. This probably needs to be stronger in tone. I'm going to just add more paint to this. That's better. And then for the finer branches, I'll just get use some of this dark green, move it over here and add some burnt sienna to it. It's good. And now I'll paint in this foliage down here. That'll do. And now we can paint the water. We had to paint all of this before painting the water because we needed to know what to put into the reflections. I can probably mix into this area my watercolor. or the colour that I'm going to use for my water. And for that, it's going to be a dull grey that's stronger in tone, however, than the sky, but not as dark as the trees in the distance. And the water itself will be a little bit lighter in the distance and a bit stronger as it gets closer to the foreground. Though that's not always the case. A lot depends on the depth of the water, so you might find I'll paint it lighter, then it'll get darker in tone, and then maybe the last little bit I might just make it just marginally lighter. That's too strong, so I'll add some water to it. And that's probably good enough. All right. Make it a bit lighter still back here. Still a bit too strong. So if it's too strong, rather than adding lots of water to this puddle here, I just pick up some extra water whenever I pick up some of that paint. Grab a little bit of another colour. Just adding a tiny bit of burnt sienna to this area here, because it gets quite shallow. I'm going to drop in some hints of reflections of these distant colours. Make these quite soft reflections. Okay, so now we paint these reflections. We've got a little bit of this green, and again, reflections are going to be duller. So the first thing you're going to get is reflections of the bank there. There. I'll put in some ripples in the water. Maybe some quick dry brush strokes to make it look a bit more interesting. Okay. And reflections are directly below the objects being reflected. Might throw in some rocks here along with their reflection. There we go. Then here we've got some of these darker grasses. Just throwing in a few grasses to break up that sharp edge. There we go. It's good. Great. I think this is pretty good to leave at that point. I won't do any more on the reflections. I might just add a bit more colour to the darker areas of these bushes. And then this area is looking pretty plain, and I can see that there's some weeds and a bit of land coming out here. So I might just put that there. I don't want to put it right in the middle, so maybe just a little bit higher. Each one have a little reflection, not a very detailed reflection. These are just to help lead the eye into the painting. Now, small adjustments before we're finished. This shoreline here can be just darkened a little bit. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please hit the like button, and if you haven't subscribed, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so that you are advised of any new videos when I produce them. If you have any questions, please leave them below, and if you have any requests for future videos, leave them in the comments section as well. I look forward to seeing you for the next video.